Hi, and welcome to Inside Judicial Watch. I'm Carter Clews, your host, the Director of Communications at Judicial Watch. And I am very pleased and honored to have with us today Robert Popper. Robert is the Senior Attorney at Judicial Watch, and he is the Director of the Election Integrity Project, a very, very important project for JW, where we keep an eye on, not more than keep an eye on, we help fight voter fraud. And Robert, there's nobody better positioned than Robert to do this, because let me read you his title. Before coming to Judicial Watch in 2013, Robert was the, and I want to make sure to get this right because it's very impressive, the former Director, Deputy Chief in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. So he has been at the forefront of the fight for quite a few years. Robert, welcome to Inside Judicial Watch.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. The issue of election voter fraud seems to be some debate on it, rightly or wrongly. On the one side, you have former President Barack Obama, who in his final press conference, and that's significant because they like to leave an impression there, told us that it was disproven, not unproven, disproven, and that anybody who mentioned it was purveying fake news. Now, let me add, for the benefit of our supporters, if there's anybody who should know about election fraud, it is Mr. Obama, because he worked hand in hand with Acorn for many years, and if I'm not mistaken, Acorn had 70 employees convicted of voter registration fraud in 12 states. Is that fairly accurate?
Well, I'm not sure of the number, but they ran into some serious problems, I know that. When I think of the Obama administration and the issue of voting fraud, I think more about their parsimonious sharing of what's called the SAVE database, the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements. It's a federal database that is one of the few that tracks who is and who is not in this country, legally and illegally from other countries, who's a non-citizen.
Right.
And his administration fought to keep from sharing that database with states that wanted to check their own voter lists against it. And in fact, they refused to do it until they were sued in 2012. Sued successfully by the state of Florida. And then they shared the database, but with so many restrictions, it was still difficult to use.
So you had a situation where the President of the United States was preventing states from thoroughly investigating voting by illegal aliens. Is that right?
That is correct. Okay, and I mean, what you need to understand is that we don't know how much voter fraud there is. We have a lot of suggestive evidence, but we don't know the exact numbers. That's hopefully what the President's Election Integrity Commission can find out. That's what we need information about, but it just strikes me as a little bit off balance or off kilter to say we don't have data when it was your purpose to not share the database that would have helped us obtain data. Now, look, we know that for example, we did a case, Judicial Watch, in Virginia. They had something like 40,000 double registrations, most of them completely innocent, people who were registered to vote in Virginia and then probably moved somewhere else and were registered there.
So they could vote twice?
They could. We had, in Virginia, in that same data pool, 17,000 were registered in 3 states. I think the winner in Virginia was registered in 7 states. Okay, we know that there are these double registrations, and we know that in Virginia, in one election cycle, there were scores of people who were registered in Virginia and then registered somewhere else and then voted in Virginia, and they were referred for prosecution. And how widespread the problem is, we don't know. This was a limited comparison, not even with all the states in the country, with population equaling about 1/3 of the total population. So we don't know how big that number would get. And
but it sounds like it's pretty extensive, and if I'm not mistaken, the Pew reporting, the Pew Poll survey people, was it 2012, they surveyed and came out with some pretty stunning figures about the number of people who could be voting illegally or irregularly at least?
Well, what they came up with was a measure of the extent to which registration records were messed up. And they found that something like 1 out of 12 were possibly inaccurate or outdated. Or,
1 out of every 12 voters.
I'm sorry, 12%, 1 out of every 8 is what I should have said. Yes, and that was in 2012, and it hasn't gotten any better as the Obama administration has gone on, and states have realized that the administration would not enforce the federal laws concerning voter list maintenance. I mean, this was a pattern with that administration, if I may be so bold, to just stop enforcing federal statutes they didn't like. And they didn't like the statute that said states had to clean their voter rolls.
Okay, let's address that specifically. Let's address that cleaning up the voter rolls specifically. I think it's the National Voter Registration Act, Section 8,
Right.
that says that states have to clean up their voting rolls.
Right.
That's mandated by federal law.
Right.
I have here a news release. I have in my hands a news release that we put out about 2 weeks ago. It's about what you're doing. You're heading up this effort. That in the state of California, let me get my figures right here. Right now it's a little blurry. There we go. In the state of California, 11 of its counties have more people registered to vote than live in the county. Now, I assume that when it says here that you have notified them that they have a problem, I assume they wrote back and said, "Thank you very much, Robert, we're going to take care of that." Is that what happened?
Well, not exactly.
Not exactly.
The Secretary of State of California, who we notified at the same time, went to the press and said that our numbers were incorrect and we were looking at it the wrong way and we had wrongly included inactive voters, which, by the way, you have to do. Anyway, not to get into the details, but what he suggested was that we were working hand in glove with the Trump administration in order to suppress voters, and so it doesn't really look like they're going to cooperate and fulfill their federal obligations.
That's not very promising. Now,
No,
Los Angeles County has 112% more registered than
more
people who live there.
Well, it's more registered voters than citizens of voting age. So in other words, 18 and older U.S. citizens, because non-citizens, of course, ideally can't vote.
Ideally.
And so 18 and older who are citizens is exceeded by the registration rate. Now, in Los Angeles County in particular, we contacted them directly. The actual numbers are worse than those numbers which we got from what they responded to a federal database. The actual number of the registration rate in Los Angeles County is 144%.
144. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to recommend to any Californians who want to cheat on voting, move to San Diego, where it's 138%. But now it would still be better to be in Los Angeles.
Yes, and perhaps when we get the true data from San Diego, we'll find out what the true registration rate is there.
It could be worse there.
But look, the states, they hate to clean their voter rolls. It costs money to do this, to get dead people off the rolls, to get people who have moved off the rolls. They fight this unless they're forced to do so. Now, typically, the Department of Justice would bring lawsuits and make them do this.
It's the law.
Right. Well, not for a while, because the Department of Justice hasn't brought a lawsuit over the NVRA, Section 8, since I brought the last one when I worked there. And the last one was in 2007 against the city of Philadelphia. And prior to that,
10 years.
Yes, 10 years.
That's 10 years.
And in the 2 years or 3 years before that, I personally commenced 5 NVRA lawsuits. Since 2007, 0. Nothing.
So Barack Obama did a good job on cleaning up the non-existent problem, as he says.
He did an atrocious job.
An atrocious job. But California isn't alone. I think you sent a letter to, how many states did you notify?
Well, California was the 12th. We sent letters to 11 other states. In Kentucky, there were 30 counties that had more registered voters than citizens of voting age. In Illinois, there were 24 counties where that imbalance existed, and then we found other counties where there were imbalances throughout the United States. And we wrote to as many as we could, and we told them that we would sue them if they didn't fix their rolls. But I will tell you, in the United States, there are, in the most recent cycle, 470 counties out of the approximately 2,500 where we had data. So that's about 1 out of every 5, where the number of registered voters exceeds citizens over the age of 18. We can't sue them all.
Dirty.
The Department of Justice has to step in. They have to do these lawsuits.
I remember when we did and many of our Judicial Watch supporters might have seen it, and I thank them for it, our panel on election integrity, and you said, we are the People's Department of Justice.
Yes.
That was months ago, and I thought that's just perfect, and that's exactly what you're saying here. You remember the movie The Sixth Sense? The little kid said, I see dead people. How about dead people voting? I want you to explain this to me. In Kentucky, we found that a state representative, Lincoln Davis, filed suit to stop the state from cleaning dead people off the rolls.
I'm not aware of that lawsuit. I'm not sure what the purpose of that would be. We know that recently there was a student who was convicted for registering 18 deceased voters. And he was convicted and sentenced to 100 days in jail. And
100 days in jail.
Well, this is one of the things people should understand. Voter fraud is not heavily penalized. It's not heavily tracked. A lot of states don't even keep track of voter fraud as a crime. And you can understand why, if it's not a serious crime in their eyes, or if it's not something that carries a heavy penalty. We don't know how bad the problem is, but we have a lot of evidence suggesting that it's bad.
You can get punished more for jaywalking than for that. Let me set the record straight.
Wow.
Lincoln sued just to prevent his state from cleaning the voter rolls. It was the Obama Justice Department that sued in the state of Florida in 2012 to prevent them from removing 53,000.
Had to be sued to turn up. Oh yes, a different lawsuit. Yes. I mean, there's
removing 53,000 dead people from the rolls.
Look, we have smart listeners, and I normally resist getting this much in the weeds.
I know.
But the Justice Department under Barack Obama joined or commenced a lawsuit in Florida, and it was taken up by another party, private parties, and they subsequently won, and it was not appealed. And what this lawsuit says is that in Florida, you cannot remove non-citizens from the rolls in the 90 days prior to an election. There was a 90-day cooling off period where you couldn't remove people who had moved to other states. And you didn't want to make a mistake right before an election.
Well, yeah.
That has now been extended in that one federal jurisdiction to non-citizens in the 90 days before an election.
So if my Honduran fiance wants to vote,
Barack Obama's Justice Department was behind that.
So if my Honduran fiance wants to vote, she can go to Florida and vote.
Well, they can't remove her in the 90 days before an election.
Okay, all right. It's the Obama administration's policies were, I'd say baffling, but appalling, I think is a better word.
Well, they made war on the NVRA. They made war on it. They didn't just not enforce it. They tried to diminish it. There's another lawsuit going on. Not to take over your show.
Please do.
Okay, there's another lawsuit going on in Ohio where Obama's Justice Department sided with plaintiffs who said that if you use the fact that you haven't voted in 2 years as a reason to send someone a letter asking them if they still live there, you're violating federal law. Okay, now the Trump Justice Department has reversed its position on this and sent a brief to the Supreme Court saying they no longer support that view.
Thank God.
Well, you would think that it would be a natural position to take.
Right.
And it is unusual for any federal agency to try to diminish the statute that is the basis of its enforcement authority. But that's how crazy things got in the Obama years. These laws were just not enforced.
I wanted to get into voter ID, but we always allow reserve the last 5 minutes for questions from our supporters, which I really appreciate. We do get a lot of questions, and they're very, very incisive questions, and I appreciate it. But very quickly, What was was it the Old Dominion study of how many illegal aliens voted in?
That was a very interesting study. It's hotly debated, but what they did was a professor at Old Dominion, Jesse Richmond, a sociologist, he took a database that they keep online where they query people about their living situations, and it's enormous. There's 80,000 people, I think, in this database, and they queried them as to whether they were citizens. And what's unique about that is that most polls don't do that. If you're taking a presidential poll, do you favor Trump or Clinton?
Right.
You know, they'll say, are you a citizen? And if you answer no, they stop. With this online poll, they didn't. And then they asked the people, citizens and non-citizens, are you registered to vote and did you vote? Well, 800 people said they were non-citizens. 14% of them said they were registered to vote against the law. 6% of them said they voted in 2008. 2% said they voted in 2010. Again, this is suggestive. If you extrapolate these percentages to the tens of millions of non-citizens in the United States, that easily could sway elections. You know, Senate elections,
Easily
House
could
elections,
and may have.
presidential elections.
Right. Right.
Now, the study, because of its ramifications, is being attacked on all sides and hotly disputed.
Of course.
The authors stand by it. And in fact, one of the criticisms was that maybe people accidentally, because there were only 800 out of all these tens of thousands,
Right.
accidentally hit the button saying they were non-citizens. Well, I spoke to the author, and he said in the subsequent 2-year study, which I think they expect to publish, 80% of those who said they were non-citizens said it again. So it was not an accident or missing a button. But again,
I think most aliens know whether they're a citizen or not. I think we can trust that that's true. And now the questions. One of them, which I think is great because it's fascinating to me. It's a little bit convoluted, the situation, but I think it's a fascinating question. Joe and Judy S. On Facebook asked us, does election integrity include things like investigations of gerrymandering?
well, we in fact, Judicial Watch started a lawsuit urging the Supreme Court to ban gerrymandering, and we proposed a theory, but we lost in court, and the Supreme Court would not take up the case. Now, there's a more recent gerrymandering decision, which the Supreme Court is reviewing, and based on the fact that they took the case at all, it looks like the case may be in trouble. They may dismiss it. We don't favor that theory. That theory is not one that you can generally apply. It doesn't have any parameters about what is and is not a gerrymandering. It's sort of a, frankly, it's sort of an oddball theory in which you try to gauge how many seats parties should have won in a magical land where things are fair.
And tell our viewers, our supporters, about the state of Maryland's gerrymandering. It's just because I know you've taken the lead in fighting that. It's simply, if I could show them the map, they'd say, what in the world is that?
Well, it's a federal judge called one of the districts a broken-winged pterodactyl lying prostrate across the center of the state. But, you know, it's like 40% of the vote in Maryland in congressional races is Republican. They got 1 out of 8 seats. It's a very effective gerrymander. One of the districts, I believe it's the 3rd district, it's the famous district. If you were to stretch out the district line, it would reach to Boston, but it only encompasses an area the size of Montgomery County. So it is a ferocious classic gerrymandering where you draw ugly districts to achieve your political result. I mean,
Make sure the party in power remains in power.
Exactly. Exactly.
One more question. The California allows anyone without ID to register to vote. Is there a federal law that does not allow anyone other than U.S. citizens to vote?
There is. It is against federal law for a non-citizen to vote in U.S. elections. In all 50 states, it's up to the states as to whether it's against the law to vote in state elections. All 50 states say that it is against the law. It's up to counties and cities to make these determinations, and there are 8 or 9 cities in the United States where non-citizens can vote, including several in Maryland, Tacoma Park, and more recently College Park was thinking about joining this crowd. It doesn't seem fair to the people who pay taxes and probably have paid them all their lives. It doesn't seem like you're creating a community. It requires maintaining two sets of voter rolls, citizens and non-citizens, at least if you're going to comply with state and federal law, and it's not always clear that that's done. So it's problematic.
It is problematic, to say the least, and that is the final word on it. And it is a serious problem. Sometimes the actions by the Obama administration or these people allowing non-citizens to vote are so absurd that it almost feels laughable. On the other hand, our entire electoral process is at stake with voter fraud. I think you'll agree with that.
Let me extend this just a little bit.
All right.
My favorite, things that make you go, huh, moment was when Terry McAuliffe vetoed a bill recently that would have mandated,
Governor of Virginia.
yes, would have mandated that the photo you took at the Department of Motor Vehicles when you got your license and registered to vote would appear in the poll book. He vetoed a bill that would have caused that to happen. What on earth is wrong with that? Why would you be opposed to having the photo that you sat for when you registered to vote being in the poll book next to your name?
On that note,
I'm sorry.
thank you, sir.
Eating up all your time.
No, it was a pleasure. It was also very informative, very instructive. I think our viewers will agree with that. And we deeply appreciate what you're doing in helping to fight voter fraud, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.